Must be a nice job. He was on vacation in Santa Clara. There's a photo of him yesterday hanging out with Jill's friends on the beach. I'm like, yeah, if you weren't the president, that would be fine. That's probably what you should have been doing this entire time. But Biden's literally just sitting there doing nothing. He will apparently be on the campaign trail, I think, with Kamala in the state of Pennsylvania. I believe next week. That's the only joint campaign appearance they have scheduled right now. So,
Yeah, I mean, listen, like I said before, I'm beginning to become convinced that actually the election may be more straightforward than I've been portraying at this point. But there's a lot of this data is certainly the hangs over it in a very profound way that people are just generally unhappy with the direction of the country, and the Trump campaign will be spending a lot of money to persuade voters that they should saddle Kamala Harris with the way they talk about the Joe Biden presidency. And
the immigration situation, of course, just that, but even more like
Yeah, so I'm trying to pull this thing and I think it's attached. I gotta take this nut off and take this gear out, and then I can pull this hole. I can pull the head off. Yeah, my little this thing overheats. It's a good camera, but it overheats. DJI makes a good camera, but it overheats. So I'm back to my Canon. Okay, so let me get that out. Let me get that ready.
a lot of this is this Florida amendment, which is on the books. So now, do I think Democrats are going to win Florida? No. But DeSantis won it by 20 points or something like that. I mean, Trump only wins by 3 or 4
but I
at
think
this
that
point.
time Trump did only win by 3 or 4.
You know, he did. I'm saying this time.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Amidst the melee.
Ballot initiative. I feel like the Arizona one might have gotten pulled, actually. It's a double. There was some court case about whether or not it actually should be on the ballot. But there are a number of swing states that have initiatives on the ballot. And so, but just to go back to the housing thing, I'm surprised how much Kamala Harris has leaned into housing in her messaging as well. Because we've been talking about how that lane was wide open, and it's such a pain point. And so the fact that she's leaning into that and talking a lot about it in her ads, I think is, I think it's intelligent and potentially consequential, understated in terms of the level of pain and discomfort that is leading to people's lives. But as I was saying before, to me, maybe the most astonishing numbers we see in polls are Kamala pulling even with Trump in terms of economic, who do you trust on the economy? Because even outside of Donald Trump, the businessman, et cetera, Republicans typically have an advantage on that number. And so that's...
Yeah, so I was having a problem trying to get this head off. And I realized because of that gear was hooked up to this one. Yep, so let's get the head off. Let's see. Make sure my camera is sitting correctly.
Has been the most compelling part of his pitch.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's turn now to immigration. Let's turn now to some interesting analysis just about where Trump stands with some issues that may put him over the edge, where he stands unpopular. This one is Rock's analysis. Recent polling, quote, suggests that American public opinion on immigration has taken a, quote, sharp rightward turn in the last 4 years. So absolutely fascinating to consider this graph. And also I want to, we should talk about what happened in the 1990s. What was going on right there?
I actually don't. I think that's when the biggest surge of Mexican border crossers. I think in the early 90s. I have to look into it. That's before my
anyway, so for those who are watching, what we have in front of us is a graph that says the percentage of Americans wanting lower immigration rose from 41% last year to 55%, which is now over 5%. Where things go back is all the way from Gallup, that's been polling on the question from the 1960s on. Basically 1965, the 1965 Immigration Naturalization Act is what changed American immigration policy and basically set the norm as to where they are today. It was relatively stable throughout the 1970s up until 1980, but that is when things changed. So the decreased number, currently standing at 55%, is now back to levels that we saw right after 2001, 9/11, and even more interesting is that the increased number has precipitously dropped since 2020, roughly around the time that Trump was president. And then the key as is, those people who were happy with the status quo policy, has also dropped pretty significantly. But the main divergence that has happened is from the Biden presidency onward is the exponential dip and increase in the decrease and the increase number. So we have the decrease number there spiking from below 30% back in 2020 all the way up to 55, and the increase number significantly dropping from above 30% down to 16% today. And so this does remain, probably the single most issue for Donald Trump and where the divergence stands, and there's a reflection both of the presidency of, I think, of the current situation, in terms of how things are at the border, and it just comes to the question of, will this issue, will this issue be able to get Republicans to
Frankly, like it was in people's faces in a way that was, that you couldn't look away from, right? But I actually think more important to that, because a lot of people don't actually think for themselves, they just follow wherever their tribe is going, is that back in the Trump era, you had a Democratic Party that was staunchly oppositional to his immigration policy and his whole way of talking about and thinking about immigration as just being a net negative. And now you don't have that. So when you have both Democrats and Republicans agreeing on a hawkish immigration approach, then their partisans are going to agree with their party leaders that we should have a hawkish immigration approach. And so, like I said, I think it's multifaceted, but to me, this is very self-serving, but it sort of validates the point I've been making of, yeah, when you have the Democratic Party or the center-left party just agreeing with the right-wing party on immigration, then you increase the power of that issue for your opponent, not for yourself. Because no one thinks, we should be, and this is their number one issue, more hawkish on immigration, is going to vote for Kamala Harris. So that's what I see going on that chart there. The negative polarization thing, I think it's not the only thing, but I think it's a very key part of the story of how you end up with those lines dramatically shifting. You have a lot of Democrats in the Trump era when the party was, doing their high school Spanish on stage and speaking about immigrants and how we needed more.
So you can see it's a huge difference in priority, and it's something that we've been talking a lot about throughout this whole show, which is what are voters, what's going to be at the top of mind. It used to be a genuine rule that economy is the top of the mind. We know that's not true from 2022, from recent evidence. And in fact, if we think back through history, there have been social elections before. It's just been a very long time since any of us have seen just parties in general, especially post-Roe, were really locked into consensus. Probably the best examples going all the way back to 1890. If you think about all of the massive divide that America had on Jim Crow, basically treating Black Americans, and how would you look? That's where a lot of Southern populism comes from. A lot of realignment politics happened back in that time. Actually, it's very similar levels of very high voter engagement, where when people care about social issues, they care a lot, and they are willing to basically vote only on that. Not an accident that also coincided with the Gilded Age, when people were very distracted from economic issues. So I think there's a lot of grinding that's happening there. The immigration issue is really interesting just to think about how that will be at the forefront of people's minds on top of linked from economic policy, but it's also divergent in terms of the way that Republicans and Democrats look at it. So, for example, if you ask a lot of Republican voters what the cure to many economic problems is, they actually point to immigration as the number one solution. Whereas it's really different when we look at Democratic social policy. So actually some of the interesting stuff here doesn't just stay with immigration, it also goes to tariffs. So let's put this up there, for example, on the screen. This was an interesting New York Times kind of side-by-side piece about how Trump and Harris have a, quote, stark partisan divide on fighting poverty. Immigration is obviously a key part of that, but if we look at some of the other issues that we see here, there is a big change in terms of the child tax credit, which we've seen previously. I think we've talked about it a lot here on the show. What is it, almost $6,000 child tax credit policy? We're not exactly sure where Trump and JD Vance has been on the record saying $5,000 child think about tariffs, that has actually been an interesting one. Do you know weigh on any of this before I get to the tariffs?
Go ahead and talk about tariffs and I can talk about tariffs.
So tariffs actually has been, I'm curious to what you think, because under the Biden administration, a huge portion of tariffs were kept in place, most of the time, which I support. I'm those of tariffs, but I see a retrenchment that's common. Trump has increased prices because of tariffs. And there was a test exchange here, actually, between NBC Meet the Press and J.D. Vance, who was very supportive of tariffs, basically a supporter of the Trump policy. Here was the exchange they got into.
The estimates vary. But how do you respond to that charge that Trump's tariffs would hurt the middle class?
Okay, so if you step back a little bit, Kristen, there's this whole thing Kamala Harris did at the convention where she made a bunch of claims about what would happen, and not enough actually reflection on what already happened, right? Because Donald Trump was already president. He used tariffs to bring manufacturing jobs back to our country. I think he'll do it again, and he did it while keeping prices extremely low. Because if you go back to the Trump presidency, we had 12,000 factories that were built during Donald Trump's presidency. Inflation never really ticked above 2% for the entire administration. In fact, it's sort of around 1.5% most of the time he was president. So when Kamala Harris says, if we do the thing that Trump already did, it's going to be way worse than this last time, I just don't think that makes sense.
Well, let's talk about Trump's record during his first term. He did impose rounds of tariffs, and it cost Americans nearly $8 billion in taxes. Do you acknowledge that imposing more tariffs will ultimately cost consumers?
Well, what it really does is penalizes importers for bringing goods outside the country into the country. I think that's just a necessary thing. We know that China and a number of other countries are using effectively slave labor to undercut the wages of American workers. Donald Trump thinks that has to stop. And again, what Kamala Harris is saying, Kristen, is if you do this, you're somehow going to cause skyrocketing inflation. In reality, Donald Trump already did it. He brought a lot of jobs back, and it didn't cause inflation.
But it caused consumers to pay more. They paid more in taxes, $80 billion worth. Do you acknowledge that consumers ultimately will pay more if there are more tariffs?
So economists just acknowledge that. No, I don't. I think economists really disagree about the effects of tariffs because there can be a dynamic effect, right? So what some economists will say is what you just said, that it will actually reduce the cost of consumers. But then other people say, I think the records this other piece is that it causes this dynamic effect that more jobs come into the country. Anything that you lose on the tariff from the perspective of the consumer, you gain in higher wages, so you're ultimately much better off.
I have been very interested. There's been an interesting retrenchment, I guess, on the Democratic side of being anti-tariff, despite the fact that Biden actually was very supportive of tariffs while he was in office.
So here's what I would say. So when we talk about the politics and then we talk about the reality of the policy. So I think tariffs are broadly pretty popular. I just saw some polling, in general, like having tariffs is associated with the idea of bringing back manufacturing jobs, especially popular in the old industrial Midwestern states. I think it's like a 60-40 issue, basically. So the politics of it, I think, are fine. What I would say is I was supportive of the tariffs Trump put into place, and I was supportive of Biden. And when you think about, like, EVs are a good example, for example. A lot of the parts that go into those vehicles come from Canada, they come from overseas. So now you're making the inputs on these finished goods much more expensive. And there are also certain things that, like, where it's really important we have chip manufacturing here. It would have been really important for us to have, the medical supplies during COVID manufactured here. There are other things like, for example, coffee. We don't make here, and I don't see any reason for us to grow coffee beans here. And yet that's going to be, there's going to be an added 10% import tax on coffee too. So I don't think that it's, a disconnect or retrenchment or whatever to say it makes sense to have certain industries that we target. And insane, especially at this point in time when inflation and cost increase is the number one concern, which is different, by the way, from where they were in 2016 when they were initially pushing this policy. It is insane to just have an across-the-board tariff policy. And the other thing that I would say is the evidence that J.D. Vance is citing that Trump brought a bunch of manufacturing jobs, it's not really true. In fact, Biden has brought more manufacturing jobs back than Trump did. The increase in manufacturing jobs across the Trump era, and I'm just talking about through COVID, because I'm just there to juggle until like the you just look up to COVID, it was the same rate of increase that you saw during the Obama administration. And you had 1,800 factories that disappeared during the Trump administration. So, like I said, I'm not opposed to tariffs when they're smartly applied, but to do it across the board is going to raise prices at a time when that is the number one issue for consumers. And just one more thing on that. You know, with Trump, it's very hard to know if you knew what he said. It's very hard. It's very hard. This is the area where he's most likely to put stuff like on the mass deportation thing. Are you really going to round up 12, 15 million people and throw them in camps and all the expense and, you know, everything that would entail? Are you really going to do that? But that's what he claims he's going to do. And he claims he's going to reduce legal immigration. That policy is also insane. This confirms the morality of Trump. Okay, you have something like a quarter of
companies like Tyson's, Purdue, and all these others actually have to pay workers a much higher wage. And if you combine it with an industrial policy, which again I support, many Republicans do not, there are a lot of different ways to come out of it. At the same time, on the mass deportation policy, even people like by the way, but the issue, as I know, is most people understand that emotionally and all that, it's probably not going to happen in any way. Just for, look, Trump bumbled on child separation, they bumbled on the vast majority of policies that they put in place. It's more probably a bargaining chip as trying to get something done in the first place, but philosophically, there is a philosophical understanding that I saw often during tariff discussion in 2016. I remember watching MSNBC. People would go to Walmart and they were interviewing people about dryers. And they're like, how do you feel about the fact that this dryer is more expensive because of the tariff that Donald Trump put on China? And they're like, that's fine with me. I don't mind at all. And that sentiment is important. Like, Americans understand what that means.
sure. And so there's a lot to dig into. It's one thing when you're like, okay, the cost of dryers is going up. And actually the cost only went up for a short period of time.
Yes.
Okay, so when you include the full picture here, cost of dryers is going up. It's another thing, and by the way, back in 2016, 2017, when inflation was low, and that wasn't a major concern for Americans, now it is the number one concern for Americans. It is another thing to say all of your groceries are going, every good that you could buy in the store, the price is going up on. What do you think of that? And then the other piece, just to reiterate here, is yes, the chips tariff and the EV tariff, like, that makes sense. These are critical industries that are growth industries for the future. If you put a tariff on everything, a lot of what the U.S. does in terms of manufacturing isn't just creating the walls of, like, the steel. And by the way, steel tariffs also make sense because we should have a domestic steel industry, and that is important to do, right? But a lot of the manufacturing here is the higher end. We're creating the finished product. You put a tariff on everything across the board, that means all of those inputs, the cost of every single one is going up. Now, maybe, theoretically, in 50 years, maybe that means there's more domestic manufacturing here. Or maybe it just means that those automakers or whoever are making those finished goods move to another country where they can get those inputs cheaper, and then, you know, where it makes sense for them to sell it back into our market rather than making it here. So even if I agree that I do think that the CHIPS Act and these tariffs, I do think that over time they will increase manufacturing. I think they're a good idea. I support that sort of targeted tariff. But when you do it across the board, it's not even clear that you end up with the manufacturing gain that you want. And in the meantime, consumers who are already so stretched on inflation are being asked to pay dramatic, significantly higher prices across the board. And so, like I said, listen, I think politically, tariffs are particular. But I think if it was actually implemented, which, you know, we should take seriously, but even if you say, okay, Congress can't do it or whatever, we should take seriously what he says and what his plans are, and, you know, like, take it to its logical conclusion.
We want more tariffs than we have to, most likely in the process.
I think if you did it across the board, I think it would be good. And I think it would be catastrophe. And, you know, also, I'll just leave it. Yeah.
Well, I would say it's not going to happen, first of all, just because I know how the process works quite literally. It's just going to be on steel, on food, the way that we have the retaliatory tariffs, all of them. I'm totally fine with it. Chinese, whatever.
But your whole case for Canada shouldn't be, well, they're not actually going to do what they say they're going to do.
If we were going to do that, I would defend it. But I'm saying it's not going to happen. So if we actually look at what the reality is through the executive branch, you have the best legal authority under the Commerce Department, under USPR Section or 301, what that is, you can use like a national security study, you can designate a certain industry critical to U.S. national security. That's why food and, food, steel, those are the two things that obviously make the most sense. The thing is, too, though, is that, and in general line, the 10% figure is not as crazy.
Apply tariffs in places that make sense. Just to give one more example of what I used the coffee example. Another example, potash, right? Potash is critical ingredient for fertilizer. We don't have much or any domestic potash production. So now maybe you say like that's critical. We should focus on that over time, et cetera, et cetera. But if you put a tariff on the importation of potash, what that means is all of your agricultural prices go up. And then, of course, we talk about immigration and deporting all of the undocumented workers and clamping down so you have even less legal migration than previously, then you're talking about an even greater price hike on all of your agricultural goods. So, agreed that there's, personally, in terms of immigration, obviously, I think there should be a path to citizenship. I think I think you're right about the way they're exploited, and that's outrageous, and that can have a wage impact. Certainly when people are being paid under the table because they're not earning the minimum wage, they're not, protected by all the labor protections that add additional costs to labor. I do think that's outrageous. My solution is a pathway to citizenship for those individuals. I think we should have more legal immigration, not less. But, putting those things aside, the big three planks of Trump's economic plan are, number one, the across-the-board tariffs, number two, mass deportation, and number three, the extension of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which was the tax cuts that largely went to corporate America. And the two in particular, the immigration crackdown and the tariffs, both of them in the short term, I don't think you would deny this, both of them in the short term will spike prices some amount. And it was one thing, the economic and political climate in 2016, very different than now, when Americans say the number one thing they're concerned about are prices. So that's just my sort of summation of how I'm viewing all of this.
Producers are telling us we're talking too much about it. Fine. Talk about it.
All right.
I'd rather talk about tariffs.
So, yeah, same.
That's part of the beauty of the show. Let's get to the indictment. Counterpoints didn't cover this yesterday, but still some pretty big news. Can't take our eye off the legal drama involving Donald Trump. People will remember there was a Supreme Court ruling which effectively vacated some of the Jack Smith indictment against Donald Trump as related to January 6th. So Jack Smith actually convened a new grand jury and has brought new charges against Trump, which he says are in line with that Supreme Court ruling. Let's put this up there on the screen. The new indictment was actually filed on Tuesday. It includes some of the same criminal charges, but actually narrows the allegations, quote, in an attempt to comply with the Supreme Court ruling that former presidents have broad immunity from prosecution. So in the new indictment, one of the reasons they had to do it was because the Supreme Court ruled that former presidents, quote, are absolutely immune from prosecution for official acts that fall within the exclusive sphere of constitutional authority. So all of the charges have to come from a place where it's not a, quote, official act of the presidency. The new indictment does away, quote, with any reference to Donald Trump's interactions with the Justice Department, whom prosecutors alleged that he was trying to enlist in his effort to undo the election. By doing that, they take it outside the realm of the so-called official act and try to kick it into the realm of the political, where there we're talking both about language, about coercion, and about some of the false elector stuff that was happening under the purview of the campaign. So, for example, the first page of the old indictment refers to Trump as the 45th U.S. president. The new indictment only refers to Trump as, quote, a candidate for president of the United States in 2020. It also, quote, deletes all references to any Trump statement made from the White House. So, for example, that January 6th message that was made on Twitter, and instead focuses in on the campaign speech at a privately funded, privately organized political rally that occurred on that day. What actually stayed the same is 4 counts. Obstruction of official proceeding, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and conspiracy against the right to vote. So all of those charges, they say, are within the realm of Supreme Court ruling. Obviously, Trump is going to challenge them, and we're probably going to have to do a new ruling or scrutiny or whatever on this. But at the very least, here's what people can say: it's not. None of this has happened before the election.
No, this is not going to be a short process. I'm sure it will go back up the chain in certain ways. Appeals and challenges likely end up back on the court if I'm running to weigh more specifically. One thing that you might recall from the decision that they issued with regard to presidential immunity is that even the conservatives, some of them issued like dissenting concurrences where, you know, they had a different opinion about how immunity would be defined, like which things are actually official responsibilities and which are in your personal capacity. So it's not at all clear exactly how they would create that dividing line, and I mean, it's a difficult line to draw. So I think it's entirely likely this ends up back to the Supreme Court. But it's the same four charges, you know, that hasn't changed. Some of the details, underlying details, have changed. Some of the phrasing, emphasizing who's the candidate, you know, this was in his role as a candidate, has nothing to do with his official responsibilities. Some of that has changed as well, but, you know, this was a separate grand jury, a different grand jury than issued the initial indictment that returns this now superseding indictment. And there was an interesting segment on CNN that we wanted to highlight for you all. So Ty Cobb, who's like a big shot Washington lawyer,
He was Trump's lawyer.
very well known here, and was for a time Trump's lawyer when he was in the White House. He was interviewed on CNN, and he was like, these charges are very strong, and he's likely to face 6 to 9 years in prison as a result just of this particular case. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Does this indictment make a clean cut case if you ask the person?
I think it does. I think you know, some of the editing you highlighted in your intro is spot on, emphasizing the private nature of many of these acts, private funding, all throughout the speech of the before the Capitol intrusion, for instance, ceremonial role, the non-government role, so for conspirators, which they can now say, actually in the original indictment, no longer in this indictment. So whatever the indictment is going to look like after it went through whatever hearings Judge Tucker's going to have, she still will have a hearing on the adequacy of this indictment. You know, it does have, you know, there is an interlocutory appeal available, at least as I read the Supreme Court decision. And that doesn't mean the Supreme Court has to take it. It means the circuit has authority or control of whatever they do. But this is definitely, this hasn't been on course to go before the election for months. This was never that is never going to happen. But as you point out, I mean, this is a very forceful document. It's pared down. Every sentence is personal narrative, right narrative. You can't read this and not understand the crimes that Trump actually committed. And you said, you pointed out, 55 years is exposure. He's not going to get 55 years, but he'll get 6 to 9 on this.
So, I mean, it's pretty confident there. I don't know if, you know, I don't know. But 6 to 9 is a lot. He's like, he's going to get 55, he's going to get 6 to 9.
He helped negotiate on the, I mean, I just feel like so massively. Listen, he's the former Trump attorney, so we should at least take it like somewhat seriously.
The other thing he said that was interesting to me is he was like, Trump's not going to take this seriously until it's like the sentencing happens and it's inescapable and like he is not going to take this seriously until it's undeniable, which I thought was just having you know, the fact that he worked closely with Trump, I thought was an interesting like intellectual insight to the way that Trump approaches all of this. Yeah. The last thing that I'll mention here is it's a little crazy. I mean, the way we thought this election would go and the way it's actually gone have been two very different things. And we really thought, for good reason, that these trials and his, you know, indictments and potential convictions or whatever would be so central to the election season, and it really is such a side note. Now, the one thing I will say, you know, that is counter to that is he does have a sentencing date coming up in that Alvin Bragg case on September 18th, which will reinsert this back into the, you know, political conversation. So we'll see what happens there and how significant. I think it's very unlikely he ends up with It's a relatively minor charge that he was found guilty of. I think it's very unlikely that he would end up facing any prison time over it. But I guess you never know. It is theoretically possible, so we'll see how all of that goes down. But that's September 18th that we'll have that sentencing date. There was some push to, extend that or push it off for a while, but they are going forward with it. So that's
So
significant Trump legal.
Georgia has passed the election. Now this has passed the election. I mean, the main two ones where he was the most in legal jeopardy are now clearly was passed. Also, if he does get elected president, there will be so much, considering the Supreme Court ruling and that all of the circus around that being sitting president, facing some of this.
Well, this one in particular is a federal case.
Yeah.
So, he theoretically can just park himself on that one, and not face it. But then you also have the question of like a sitting president and being prosecuted, and that's typically been seen as a no-no. So, I think him getting elected is probably a get out of jail free card for all of these things, which of course heightens the importance of the election certainty to the person of Donald J. Trump, who I'm sure would prefer not to go to prison. All right, we have a few updates we wanted to bring in with regard to Israel that are consequential. To put this up on the screen, Channel 13, which is the Hebrew language outlet that reported this, and it seems to be correct. Israel has agreed to a sort of kind of temporary humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza to allow the administration of polio vaccines. The next tweet down from this, if you don't have it, I'll just read you. It says, first report, Israel has agreed to Tony Blinken's request to implement a ceasefire in specific areas of Gaza, so not the whole thing. Not as part of negotiated, was not enough of the ceasefire, apparently. We put this up on the screen to keep them from continuing to target aid vehicles. This is the World Food Program, run by the UN, temporarily suspended activities throughout Gaza after one of its vehicles was hit by at least 10 bullets. They went on to say, despite the World Food Program's coordination with Israel and Gaza deconfliction, and that its vehicle was marked and cleared by Israeli authorities, it was directly hit by Israeli gunfire as it was moving towards an Israeli army checkpoint. This, of course, recalls that multiple drone strike on the World Central Kitchen vehicles, and of course the fact, Sagar, that we've had hundreds, dozens, and many more than 100 aid workers who have been killed by Israel in this conflict. So, of course, the starvation and overall humanitarian conditions for Palestinians are horrific. And now you have the World Food Program unable to operate because, once again, one of their vehicles was targeted.
Yeah, it was really, it was actually crazy to see Cindy McCain, who I always think it's ironic is the literal head of the World Food Program, especially because her daughter is probably one of the most pro-Israel people that's out there. Anyway. She says this quote is totally unacceptable, the latest in a series of unnecessary security incidents that endanger the lives of the World Food Program in Gaza. So overall, the situation in Israel is still quite crazy. I mean, Ryan and Emily covered this yesterday. There's this major West Bank operation which is happening there. The government is also saying all kinds of crazy stuff. We have this major Lebanon situation, the ceasefire talks. I mean, where we literally, basically total limbo. Joe Biden still huge, though, so don't worry about that. In terms of executing anything in American power, I don't know. It feels like there is a level of stasis that things have reached. It is August 29th, and I was thinking about that. I mean, we're coming up on 1 year, since October 7th, which is genuinely stunning and crazy to consider. But, not only all that it's right there, but in terms of power politics, foreign policy change, and what all of that has looked like, but in a certain sense, it does feel like things are both calming down in Gaza, but now expanding in terms of Lebanon and the West Bank. Yeah. That's what it really looks like right now.
Yeah, just to go back to that World Central Kitchen thing, because I was thinking about this, at the time, because this was the outfit associated with Jose Andres, that was this was a big deal here in D.C. We know him personally. He was out giving interviews, speaking out. It was a big focus. You recall they triple tapped that vehicle convoy. It was clearly marked. They'd gone through the deconfliction, and they made sure that everyone was killed. The survivors were made familiar with the target. And so there was massive outrage. And yet, their calculation was we can let that die down, and it served their ultimate interests of, and I mean, this is very clear from the way that they've operated the entire time, and the public pronouncements they've made about effectively starving Gazans, they succeeded in diminishing the number of aid workers who were able to do the job, the amount of aid that could be distributed. And so, this is just the latest incident in what has been a successful strategy of making it impossible and deadly to try to distribute, and even the wildly inadequate amount of aid that gets into the Gaza Strip. Also just a sign of, again, I think any society can feel like, I don't think that Israelis as human beings are any different than any other people around the world. But this society, in terms of what they have come to accept and embrace, a majority of Jewish Israelis, it is profoundly disturbing, the dark things that they now accept and embrace, including, we've discussed this incident on camera of gang rape of a Palestinian, documented that this has occurred multiple times. And there was a new poll, we can put this up on the screen, asking how Jewish Israelis would want to handle those soldiers who gang raped Palestinian detainees at that prison torture facility. Almost 2/3, 65% of Jewish Israelis say there should be no criminal prosecution. They would prefer them to be handled in a disciplinary manner only. Only 21% of Jewish Israelis thought that there should be a criminal trial for gang rape. I don't even know what you say about that. The extremes have clearly taken over, and you can see how, in Bibi's actions and the way he's prosecuted the war and the way he's really, leaned into these engineers their view of how to prosecute this assault on Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. These are the sorts of numbers he's responding to. And it has been, politically, it has worked out for him. He had gently from where they were after October 7th, because recall, he was Mr. Security, and it was his entire philosophy that, obviously that Hamas is responsible for their actions and not taking away from the horrors that they committed. But in terms of his theory of what would provide security for Israelis, it completely failed. And there were massive public recriminations, plus there was, already this massive backlash over the judicial coup that he was trying to effectuate that was deeply unpopular as well. His position has recovered quite a bit.
Yeah, no, his position is not only recovered, it's largely the strategy is working for him now currently, and there's been, we wanted to also put some other troubling precedents in here and to look into. Let's put this up there on the screen. There was a major report that Binance, the cryptocurrency exchange, was, quote, under scrutiny for seizing Palestinian crypto funds. Now, Binance is disputing this, basically saying that they're in compliance with anti-money laundering law. For example, let's go to the next part of this. They say the Binance CEO dismissed it, said that it was basically only in compliance with anti-money laundering funds, saying, quote, only a limited number of user accounts were blocked from transacting. There have been some incorrect statements about this. As a global exchange, you have to comply with internationally accepted money laundering legislation, just like any other financial institution. Will continue to educate users. What this is highlighting is just like the power of the Israeli government right now in trying to deny and use its sovereign status in the conflict, not only over Binance, but Elon Musk previously had issues with Starlink, as well, for example, because he was like, hey, I want to give Starlink to Gaza. And they were like, yeah, that's not going to happen unless we give permission, basically. And it's one of those where it shows the power of a nation state whenever they want to.
Yeah, I mean,
They've done it with Facebook, they've done it with a couple of other ones as well.
I read the replies, by the way, to that tweet saying, like, this is fun, we only did for a few, and the people were not buying it. Just for whatever that's worth. The crypto world was thought as quite a betrayal, as they should, because one of the key selling points of crypto is that it would not be, it would be outside of these various nation-state pressures, and it's not. Very clearly.
I mean,
in the same way.
Like, it's just not that simple.
It could be, but it's not.
No, it's saying everybody is, you've got to go to great length. Listen, in general, if you want to transact and the government doesn't want you to transact, good luck, even with crypto. And I get but you can do it. I would just say it's still very difficult. It's not the easiest thing in the world. I'm not going to give away any secrets here on the platform, so the FBI comes at me. But there are definitely ways to get around it if you want to. If you want it to be easy, like with a bank or something, then use the legitimate system. The problem with the legitimate system is, well, you know, the government, anytime they want, boom, your entire account is completely shut down. And we
First one, obvious one, second, Henry confirmed that he's not going to be able to next year. He's going to be a test rider for HRC. Chantra's going to be stepping up and taking his place in the LCR Honda team. Chantra, I think we can all agree, is a character. He's fun, he's smiley. It's hard not to like the guy. Is he going to be suited to a MotoGP Honda machine? Certainly, not consistency is not maybe his forte, but how do you see the kind of move there? I mean, it makes sense, I guess, from a commercial point of view, having a tie rider on the grid is fantastic for the championship. It's fantastic for a certain market of MotoGP, which is a huge market indeed. But you know, Adam, how do you see it?
It's the second Asia Talent Cup rider to be entering MotoGP for 2025 after the recent announcement of Ayagura, who's here in the paddock. I was trying to work out whether he's in condition or he's fit or he's going to be racing or what. There doesn't seem to be much of an update in terms of his condition.
Is it 80%?
80%, so he's going to give it a go. Obviously the Honda, the LCR Honda there, it's not quite an accurate description, but it wasn't an opportunity to sweep up Ayagura, which Chantra's taken on the mantle. And I just tweeted this. I find it quite funny that HRC have hired the person with the biggest smile in MotoGP. So is that to add an extra kind of energy, or they?
That's most simple.
How do you see it, Dave?
I mean, it's certainly interesting. I mean, Chantra seems to have the right attitude. Like he's open to it. You know, he's willing to try it. He is going to face a pretty tough couple of years. I actually find the whole thing, what I find much more interesting is Taka Nakagami being a development rider. Taka said he's also going to be staying around to help Chantra adapt to the...
In Japan.
Yes, but he's also going to be coming here. He talks about coming to do some wild cards. And like the most important thing is that Taka Nakagami speaks Japanese, speaks directly to the Japanese engineers. Because the problem that Honda face is there is basically no communication between Japan and Europe. Stuff turns up, and the people here have to sort of deal with it and figure it out. Yes, they've been locked up, I suppose, for about we all have it from his mouth, and I'm like, oh, you know what to say.
Guys, how does this look like this with Honda? How do they not realise that this is an issue that they have to address?
Have you never worked for a large company?
That was named Honda. This is even another thing, you know, big companies in Japan. Honda is something special. It's almost like a religion. How can you ask somebody to change his religion? You can't.
Yeah, we've always done it this way. I mean, like literally, things work in a particular way, especially large companies. It's very difficult to get them to change. There's also in particular the Japanese culture, which is very focused. It's quite hierarchical. It's structured and working in a particular way. That's why it is still this way.
I found it amazing that Luca Marini didn't even know about this.
Yeah, he had to hear it from you.
Yeah, we had to inform him during the media debrief. And just my sort of 2 cents on Chantra, I just hope it's not going to be a Hafiz Syrin kind of situation where he's so happy to be in MotoGP that any kind of idea of performance or ambition tends to sit by the wayside.
I mean, Chantra has showed that he's capable of winning Moto2 races, Peter. I think there's maybe an argument that the situation in his current team isn't quite working that smoothly, and that's maybe something that's holding him back at the moment in Moto2. But that was crash a lot, and it's, I mean, I can't see a situation where Lucio Cecchinello isn't having to pay incredible amounts of money to replace Marty Clive pretty much every weekend. I mean, how do you see it?
I feel really sorry for this guy. I just feel very sorry.
If you like the first half of this show, you can listen to the full edition by going to paddockcastpodcastpatreon.com and signing up to become one of our podcast patrons. So head over there right now, sign up, and listen to the rest of the show, which is on. I think has been considering, you know, whether it's worthwhile continuing to become Princess, make a lot of money in his career from his days at Suzuki, yeah, but I don't know. I mean, it's definitely a big if. And if he does retire, I mean, then that's another seat that's opened up to riders like Mir or riders like Oliveira, or so it's quite interesting. Yeah, but I mean, if I had to bet my money on it now, I would say it sticks with me.
And it's an attractive thing as well because it's clear that the bike is making progress and there's a lot happening at Yamaha, and if they get a satellite team as well, then it really puts them in a position.
Last thing, which rider move would you both love to see? I mean, if there's something, even if it's entering the realms of fantasy, what would you like to see come off? I mean, for me, I'd like to see maybe Joan Mir ride the other gas. I think, he's one of these riders at the moment. There's a little clutch of them that needs to revive their career, and I think Bezzecchi's in the same situation. His sort of choice of staying with the team and with that package is not really paying off so far. But why not Mir to go sort of orange or /red?
I would like to. Well, I mean, what I would like to see is Mark Marcus in the KTM. That's not going to happen. But yeah, I mean, I would quite like to see Mir on a Yamaha. I think that would be interesting. It would also be very interesting to see him taking the place of Alex Rins to retire. It would also be interesting to see Oliveira on a Yamaha, but I think Oliveira has been moved around too much. He spent too many. He hasn't had the kind of stability that he really needs. Yeah, apart from that, I mean, like in Moto2, like Joe Roberts, you really want to see him in Moto2 because I think he absolutely deserves a seat in Moto2. How well he will. It's not going to make the same impact as Pedro Acosta, but he is going to be, a perfectly competent Moto2 rider. So I think a lot of the excitement is already happened.
Yeah, we'll go along with that. I think it would be good to see Roberts up there maybe in Tech 3, maybe in Trent House, maybe in the Pramac team when it goes against Yamaha. I think those are all attractive seats where we can show some talent.
We reached that stage of the show where one person on this call can have a big smile and get very smug and feel very happy with himself, although perhaps not so much this week. It's the Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League update time. Dave, how happy are you?
I mean, I will own up to it being more luck than judgment, and I really should have boosted Pekka Bagnaia. I'm such an idiot for not doing it, but I am still ahead. I did drop a bunch of places, so that's not great. But yeah, and I've now got to try and find a way to engineer a way to get Mark Marcus in my team without losing Pekka Bagnaia. So that's going to be tricky. Also, I dropped Marco. I still can't believe I dropped Franco Morbidelli from my team for Alex Rins. That is the world's most boneheaded move.
Neil, how was your weekend?
I thought it was a good weekend, but there 968th, still furrowing my own.
68?
Yeah, my own little path all the way down there.
75th.
Yeah, but there are 1,216 players in our league, so it's kind of slightly reassuring to know that a quarter of them are behind. So it doesn't sound great, but when I say that I'm just 3/4 behind, so damage.
Who was the rider that hit your team the hardest on the weekend?
I had a good lineup, I had a good weekend. I had Mark and Pecco, and then I had Pedro and Franco. Franco actually had a decent weekend for a change, so it was solid. What hit me was
behind you. So I'm going to be working overtime, double hard, studying the stats, because those 7 places out of 1,000, 1,200, my friend, that's not a place, that's not like a comfortable margin for you. So watch out, I'm coming.
This is the first time that I'm not coming last in our mini competition between the 4 of us. So Dave and Steve, I'm coming for you.
Yeah, I'm absolutely delighted that Steve is not on the show this week. So great. Stay in the hedge somewhere, Steve. Listen, we've got a couple of rapid listener questions to get through before we wrap up this show. Neil, over to you first. Adam Pierce asks, why was Moto2 shortened so much?
Well, there was a red flag in the Moto3 race, and that was obviously that delayed things and meant that we finished up a little bit later than it should have done. As we know, TV is kind of king in
sacred. It's not kind of king. It's absolutely everything.
It's everything, yeah, and they want to have their full arm build up for MotoGP. and basically, I think Moto 2 and Moto 3 guys have learned in the last couple of years that they're very much some way down the pecking order when it comes to the importance of where they stand. So yeah, they didn't want to have Moto 3 finishing too late, which would then impact on the kind of build up to the MotoGP race, and therefore it was short. We've seen this a few times before, I think, in the past. As if you remember the Argentina MotoGP race last year, was short to about 12 or 13 laps. A few riders are not saying it's an awful long way to fly and travel just to do 12 laps of racing on Sunday. So yeah, similar situation here, I think.
Dave, you've got 30 seconds to sum up John Ericsson's question about the validity of Yamaha's test program.
I think it's much better this year than it was last year. They're actually going out and doing a lot more riding. So much so that Fabio Quartararo was starting to worry about sort of like his fitness. He's starting to say quite a lot, even though he desperately wants to do it. So they are doing it more and more, but they really need either a second test team, also because Cal Crutchlow surgery, which is a bit of a blow. They have some Japanese test riders, but that's basically for tour events. They really need another test rider, and I'm quite surprised they didn't try to snag Aleix Espargaro, because I think he would have been a fantastic fit.
Neil, your 30 seconds comes to ask a question from Matonj, who asks, what's up with Arbolino? And observes that riders usually need 2 to 3 years in Moto 2 to be able to make the step. So, thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question. Tony has been, it's been a torrid year. This time a year ago, he was still leading the Moto 2 World Championship and widely to be stepping up to MotoGP this year. But he currently sits 13th. He's had a best finish of 7th. He's only had 3 top 10s from 7 races, and he just hasn't been able to find any kind of confidence with the front end of his bike this year. Now that there's just ready tires, get the impression that he's starting to lose a bit of patience with the situation. All the changes to the bike. It looked as though he made a big step forward after the breath test, but the last couple of results have just been a bit shocking. And one of the weird things is that last year we saw Tony was pretty much the king of the starts and king of the first couple of corners. He had this tremendous ability to qualify badly, but then exit the first turn 5, 6, 7, or 8 positions ahead of where he qualified. And just hasn't been the case this year. And I guess that shows just how much confidence is lacking currently. So yeah, tough times for Arbolino, and I was really expecting by this stage of the season for him to have worked it out and to have come to a sort of to help him ride the way he wishes. But it's kind of tough seeing a rider of that quality down so low in the championship.
Yeah, it's been interesting seeing the riders who've really struggled with the Pirellis, because there's been a few surprises in there that people you were expecting to come and just haven't sort of turned up. And Arbolino's definitely among them.
Okay, VJ, maybe over to you again, Neil, considering you've got a bit of a bonhomie with Franco Morbidelli and his whole vibe. Is he coming back to his best?
I'll take that as a compliment, Ed, because I like to think that I have a similar laid-back nature to Franco. Yeah, I would say he's coming back to his best. It was a good weekend, wasn't it? Frankie, he was, 4th in the sprint, 6th. Was he 6th in the race? I really should have... he was 6th in the race, yes, exactly. So 4th and 6th. Pretty decent. Yeah, and it does show that he's kind of getting back towards some kind of proper form. And he had a much better start on Sunday as well, which is an area that has been letting him down. I think the unfortunate matter of fact for Franco is that he's